So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Provincial Office webinar. I hope you're all safe and well. My name is Andrew Rydell and I'm the Provincial Deputy Grand Secretary. So today's session, with the lifting of the suspension, a lot of the focus has actually shifted onto Masonic halls to see, whilst UJLE have said we are allowed to meet, the focus has been on Masonic halls to see if we're able to meet. There is more basic requirements, and the first thing of that's the Masonic halls surviving the lack of income that they've seen over the past few months. To talk about the halls and the halls support group, I'd like to introduce Worshipful Brother Barry Jameson. Good afternoon, Barry. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Andrew. Yes, good afternoon, brethren and companions.
How have you been spending your time over the last couple of months?
Very, very busy with other people within the province, communicating to members of our Masonic halls, initially providing guidance for support and subsequently providing a steer on viability and inability through the risk assessment to return to work. Outside that, I've made 27 loaves without the assistance of a bread maker. And I was delighted 3 weeks ago when our golf course opened and I was able to go back and knock the living daylights out of an inanimate object around Haydock Park.
That sounds fantastic. I'll leave over to you for the presentation for now.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I do have a PowerPoint presentation or presentation prepared. If that can go on the screen, it's just to steer me through and keep it structured, but it may also help the brethren to see what I'm talking about as well. So there's the opening slide, and I'm speaking very much as a member of the hall support group. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do so. And I shall go into the first slide, and with a bit of luck, that should work. So I'm now a member of the hall's support group. I joined in September when I was lucky enough to be appointed as an assistant provincial Grand Master, and joined other people who were there in what was the Halls Committee. And you may remember that. I think its main purpose in many respects was to hold its annual seminar for Masonic halls, where they would get a speaker in to speak about relevant items. But I think the real value in that get-together is for the members of the halls to share their ideas and views. We have now changed the name of the Halls Committee to the Halls Support Group, and it may seem a small shift that, but it was intended to better reflect what our intentions and our objectives were. That we want to engage with the halls more actively, and we see ourselves as developing an organisation within the province that can provide professional help and support to those who have the big responsibility of looking after and managing our Masonic halls. From the team of people who were there, we added to the existing strengths of it by bringing some extra folk in, and I'll speak about that in a moment. We shifted the dynamic from being passive, waiting to be contacted, that's never going to happen, to more dynamic. I say that's not going to happen. It's not a cynical dismissal, but our Masonic halls are run by their own boards of directors, and they, in many respects, are professionals at what they do. And so they're more than capable, in most instances, of running the halls themselves. So they may resist what they might see as interference. So we need to work hard at breaking barriers down there so that we can get in and actively engage with those who run our halls. And our objective in doing this is to promote good practice and share knowledge, because we do see that it's a bit curate's egg, it's good in parts and less good in others. But where we see stuff that is good practice and can be spread around, then really there's value in making sure that people can have at it. Something that's worked over here works very well somewhere else. And we developed our mission, if you like, which is promoting sustainable development. I just got to get through that. The whole support group is now Chris Maloney is our chairman. Chris is our provincial Grand Superintendent of Works. And certainly from London, they look to appoint someone into this role as Grand Superintendent of Works who can add value to the halls. And we, from the whole support group, would welcome that approach in West Lancashire. And Chris certainly is one such, and he's our chairman. And I think he's in his second year as Superintendent of Works now. So this may well be an office that people go into for longer than 1 year so that they can eventually have an effect. John Hutton has been there a little while, and he's been heavily engaged in developing the hall at Swinton. Phil Craig's our secretary. David Edwards is a newcomer. He's a solicitor and is responsible for regulatory compliance. Jim Fallow has a good background in hospitality and the beer trade. Paul Heathcote has worked professionally in IT and finance. Terry McGill is the chair of the Preston Masonic Hall, and I'm the liaison with the cabinet. And my background is mainly business. I'm a qualified accountant, but that really doesn't sum it up. My background is working with large and medium-sized organisations and working with the managements of those to get improvement out of their results. So we do have people who are capable of adding value to the process. So the resources we have are legal and operational, and they're summarised under that, and I won't weary you with the detail, other than we talk there about Companies Act and Memorandum and Articles of Association. The current Companies Act is the 2006 Act, which in itself was a consolidating act. What will happen is interim, there will be amendments to a Companies Act, and every so often there'll be a consolidating act which sweeps all that up. So the Memorandum and Articles of Association, which tend to be the constitution most of our halls are working with, or some work with boards of trustees, they are their constitution, and they should reflect the latest version of the Act. I'm not saying this unkindly, but I did work in one hall, and their Memorandum and Articles of Association were dated 1924. Now, they had a couple of attempts to update that since, but really they were working with legislation that was so out of date, it was really not really of much value to them. So there's a big merit in sort of having a look at this. And we would look at the fact that, is your Memo and Arts consistent with the current Companies Act? That would be evidence of good practice. If it's not, then we would recommend that you do something about shifting that up, and we could help you. We can provide financial and IT support, and we can provide compliance report. And there's a whole plethora of requirements under that. It's almost an industry in its own right. As part of our resources which we have developed, we have a whole scorecard, and I'm going to show you that in a moment. We have model memorandum and articles, so if people need to update theirs and wanted a set into which they could post the relevant bits and pieces for their hall, then we can provide that. We have a model form employment contract and a 0 hours contract. That would apply to a lot of people in the catering industry, so we're able to do that. We have a model form catering contract for a franchisee, and that's been developed by a lawyer for one of our halls, and they've been kind enough to let us put that into our portfolio of support resources. And we have draft budgets and cash flow documents and excuse me, a draft business plan. So any hall management who feels the least bit deficient in any of those areas, we could provide strong support and the resources to help them develop in their management systems and to develop their business plan, which is where all this heads. I have there referenced the whole scorecard. I'm just going to go into that. Right, we cover 3 headings with the scorecard. So management effectiveness, and you can see in the category what we would look at there, and that is the whole strategy. Does it have detailed budgets, financial reports, management structure, and so on. We can then move down to compliance and down below then we look at financial performance. So we look at those three areas and we rate them, and you can see that this is a live hall that's been rated. The ratings are in the column third from the left, so rating 0.5, 0.5, 1, 0.5. And this is developing a traffic light system, so red, green or amber. And you can see the rating legend in the middle of there. And if I could go back now, so all of that is done when we speak to a hall and we'll do the rating, and we bring that ultimately together into a scorecard which summarizes it. And if you could go back, Andrew, I don't know how easy it is for you, to the PowerPoint, it's slide number 6 brings that together. Yeah, so you can see this particular hall had an overall score of 0.7. It scored pretty well on management effectiveness. It scored pretty well on finance. It scored very well on finance, in fact. And the compliance bits were the bits that let it down. And the comment there is that most of the compliance work stems from a long period of underinvestment during previous management. That was true, but it's always a good starting point to blame your predecessor if things go wrong early on your watch. But nonetheless, that is where it was, and they've now been able to work on that. It identified their areas of weakness, and they're well underway now to having a full set of greens pretty well. This is a strong hall and doing extremely well. So I'm now going to move on to slide number 7. Under the Provincial Grand Master, or under the chairmanship of the Deputy Provincial Grand Master, we've had a group of people looking at the impact of COVID-19 on our province, on our halls and on the brethren. And if we can just bring that together to where the halls feature in this, we had 2 objectives here. One was to ensure the viability of our halls, and secondly was to help the hall's management teams to create a COVID-safe environment. And it sounds like stating the obvious, but the viability of the halls is critical, because when we come out of this, we want to be sure that the halls are still there for us when we're able to return to business. And in terms of returning to business, the brethren need to be convinced that where they're going back to is COVID-safe, a key issue, both of those. So we sent out a financial stress survey, and we were encouraged, considerably so, delighted in fact, that we got 100% response from 37 halls contacted. We have over 40 meeting places in the province, and we concentrated here on halls that are run by brethren under a halls management scheme. So we had 37 halls respond to us. If you could scroll down, we can see the halls on the left-hand side and the kind of headings over which we analysed it, but we can scroll right down and hopefully the windows are still frozen, and you end up with 2 boxes at the bottom and a heading or a subheading that says when the cash runs out. From the information we received, the survey was considerable and detailed and probably gave us a better overview from the province at the centre, if you like, than we've had on our halls ever, because we go back to the point that the halls are independent, view themselves as such, and sometimes are somewhat reluctant to let information come away from their immediate sphere of influence. So this has been a terrific shift for them, because they've been so open here. So from the survey, we had, if you look at the blue columns there, we had 4 halls that said they would probably have financial difficulties or begin to run out of cash in the quarter between now and December, so from September to December, quarter 4 of this year, and 8 halls in quarter 1 next year, from January through March. And in the little yellow box, we just summarise that, and the halls at risk, I've put them in as A, B, C, D, E and F, and I know who they are. And of those halls, we contacted 6 of them, spoke to them directly, and as a result of that, we now are keeping 3 of those halls, as it were, on watch. And should they begin to get into difficulties, then we're poised and ready to go in and provide some practical help to them. We did a couple of other things, and the pie charts at the bottom show the staff on furlough and whether the halls were topping up to 80%. The significance of that being that the furlough scheme will end shortly, and if we're not back to business, then those halls who have staff on furlough will have a decision to make, whether they're going to retain them or whether they're going to and pay them, or whether they're going to have to let their staff go. So it's key that we look quite closely at an ability to get back to some form of business come September, if nothing else, from the hall's perspective, for the retention of the people that they have got in there. So, through the COVID-19 committee, 2 key tasks have been carried out. We did the hall survey with its follow-up actions, and alongside the survey that was done by us, a membership survey was done, which helped the province to consider and shape its future intentions and actions. From our perspective on the halls, we support the hall's viability. We managed to get the West Lancashire Freemasons charity to provide a loan scheme for halls. So they would act as a lender of last resort, if you like. So halls that got into real financial difficulty, there is help available through that loan scheme, which has been developed by the province, working with the West Lancashire Freemasons charity. So by and large, we've now got a sharp view on the viability of our Masonic halls. So we should be able to help them to sustain. And secondly, the key then was to help the management of the halls to establish what we describe as a COVID-safe environment for the brethren. Because again, you'll never get confidence in the brethren to come back to their halls if we cannot support that. So we sent out a risk assessment, and at the moment, those risk assessments are coming back into us. We've asked the managements of our halls to come back and tell us when their risk assessments have been done, and to provide us with a copy of the risk assessment. The membership side of that is really working with the groups based on the membership survey, and all roads are really looking to a return to business. Now, it's easy to say that, but then behind that, one's got to look at what's happening nationally and work with the advice that's given to us there, and that of UGLE. And they sent 2 documents out yesterday. The first, Rising 4th edition, which included aspects of going back and working Masonic business. And then they have their bigger equivalent to our hall support group, their halls advisory group, which also puts information out to advise hall managements what they should be doing and what they can and cannot do. I'm through now pretty well with the work that we have done working with our halls, and I would finish off by saying that once the risk assessments are done, those halls that say they have a COVID-safe environment for the brethren, it then becomes a serious focus for the group individually, or the group management, if you like, the leaders of our Masonic groups, to then work with the brethren in those groups to determine when they would go back to their Freemasonry in some form and when that would be. That's not something you can drive people towards. They've got to feel comfortable and confident about that. But we believe the work we've done with the hall should at least enable a secure platform. A subject that has been raised a couple of times is dining, and that the no festive boards edict certainly acts as an emotional and practical disincentive for brethren to go back. But we believe that some dining can be done as long as it's done within government and the national guidelines that are out for social distancing. They changed a number of items within that a week or so ago when the leisure industry and the pub and hospitality industry opened up. So the advice we're giving back to Masonic halls would facilitate some form of dining, but it must not be in the style of a festive board. So that's been occupying us somewhat for the last 3 months. And I know you're all quiet, and if you've got questions, I'd be happy to take them, but I do thank you for listening patiently to what I've had to say. So that's my input on Masonic halls.
Thank you. Barry, just one of the things that you showed me yesterday was the risk assessment that the halls committee has done, the template that they produced, that has been produced for halls. I'm just wondering if it's worth just having a look at that.
Yeah, this is the risk assessment that was sent out to the halls. It actually was wrapped up in a slightly bigger bundle, which had guidelines on it as well. And if we look at the first part of the risk assessment, you can see that we're looking at, on the left-hand side, the likelihood, the severity, and then if you produce a function of likelihood and severity, then you get the risk rating. And that's looking across to the right then, whether the risk is minor, moderate, or major. And one can go down a whole series of things. If we could scroll, Andrew, just down that. There's an explanation there on how the risks develop, and the halls have worked through something similar to this. So if we look now down this on the significant risk heading, then it covers vulnerable persons, the spreading of COVID-19, if you could just keep going, then the airborne spread of COVID-19, further down, and again. So there's a whole series of subsets to that. And could you just go back, just one there? I just noticed something flashing by. So if you look over to the right-hand side here, somewhere it says, yes, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet point from the top in column underneath E, where it says, using back-to-back or side-to-side working or seating. The change for the pub and leisure industry on social distance moved from 2 meters to 1 meter plus, and the plus was the mitigation that was being allowed in. We should be using 2 meters for social distancing where and when we operate. The 1 meter plus mitigation, one of the mitigating features would be wearing a mask. Now, that's not very practical if you're wearing a mask, but one of the other mitigating factors is if people are not sitting face to face with each other. So if they were sitting back to back, then you would be able to sit people down, and you would be able to use the 1 meter plus distancing rather than 2 meters. I've seen a question come up from Mark Holloway, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I'm just really giving you here some of the depth and detail of the risk assessment, and so we can carry on. That's covering surface contacts. So you can see there's something here, this is quite substantial. And the ones we've had back, not all of them relate absolutely to the one that we have issued, but the ones we've had back would mirror this type of risk assessment. So as yet, from the half dozen that we've had back, we've seen nothing that we would feel, well, someone shortchanged the detail that needs to be covered as part of the risk assessment. Could just scroll down a little bit more. It may well cover the guidelines underneath. If you keep going, and that's it. Yeah, that's the risk assessment. But that was wrapped up in a whole series of other items, which was part of our guidelines.
So there's a couple of questions that have come in. I'll just take them roughly in order. It's looking like, just combining Chris Butterfield's question and Mark Holloway's question regarding dining and the relationship to the government guidelines. For the moment, for private premises, only 2 households are allowed to mix in numbers of 6. Obviously, if you go to a pub, then you can mix in groups of 2 households, but lots of groups of 2 households indoors. What are the kind of criteria that we're looking for, criteria and circumstances which will allow halls to make that decision that they can then offer dining?
it's a difficult one. It's almost in the category of I'm not so sure, but no, I'm absolutely uncertain. But if one can come away from that, the guideline that was in the First Rising document yesterday, the question was, can individual lodge members be prevented from dining together after a meeting? And the answer is it would be an individual choice, and there is no rule by which they can be prevented from doing so, provided there's no breach of government guidance. Lodges in England must not organise a meal for the members because that would breach the government guidance on visiting restaurants in groups of more than 2 households. However, the government guidance is that you can host up to 30 people, but you wouldn't have 30 people as one group. So I couldn't take the Wagon and Horses formation drinking team along to the Masonic Hall for a meal. But if the members individually if the hall was providing food and drink, and the members individually wanted to avail themselves of that, then I don't think that, providing they keep the social distance, then there's nothing to stop them dining.
Okay.
It cannot be a festive board, and it cannot, if one was to if one sticks with the advice that was in the First Rising yesterday, which was sharpened up the position from what had previously been said, then it should not be something that was organised by the lodge.
Sure, and that's providing it's happening at the halls as long as they are a COVID secure environment or consider themselves to be a COVID secure environment.
That's the starting.
They can then.
That's the starting point. That it is. That a note I sent out recently to one of the halls was that firstly, the directors or the management of the hall should be content that they are providing a COVID-safe environment, and the risk assessment is designed to get the halls there, and without that it will be extremely difficult to engender any confidence in the brethren. We've asked for the risk assessments, irrespective of whether it's ours or some other version which has been used, to be sent to the Provincial Secretary and myself, and it is also in our risk assessment that a completed version should at least be displayed in the hall and should be sent to the secretaries of lodges and scribees. I then go on to say that no festive boards clearly, precisely means that. It's almost like a double hit there, clearly and precisely in the same sentence, but nonetheless, the Grand Secretary and the Grand Scribee reiterated that in the Zoom last week, and this particular hall wasn't the first one with the query. And to provide a dining facility after a meeting, it seems to me is something you could safely do, providing you're doing it on this individual basis. And for instance, the current advice on social distancing is 2 meters or 1 meter with mitigation. The mitigation is the wearing of masks, or in the instance of dining, not sitting face to face. So, a long and qualified answer to a simple question. However, I concluded by saying, if the arrangements are consistent with the risk assessment, then I think they could provide meals. You could absolutely not have the meals a festive board, however, and distancing and table service would be an essential part, even for the bar, if that was open. And ideally, any payment should be done contactless.
Okay. Chris Maloney, I'll come to you in a second. Andrew Thompson, I've just seen your message about Hawkshead Lodge, about you having to lift your lodge furniture in and out of the cupboard, etc., etc. The only furniture, Masonic furniture, that you need in the room is really the VSL, the square and compasses, and then your warrant, which I know you keep at the hall anyway. So you wouldn't actually need to get all the lodge chairs out, all that extra furniture out. You only need the VSL, the square and compasses in there to be able to open the lodge. So it may be that you remain at your usual meeting place, but reduce the amount of equipment that you bring out in order to open the lodge. Like I say, you own, all you need is the square and compasses and the VSL in the room to be able to open the lodge and the warrant, of course. So that's something that you could consider on this occasion, just doing it with reduced furniture. Chris Maloney, you're unmuted now. Would you like to ask a question?
Thanks, Andrew. Just a couple of comments, really, rather than questions, and responding to the questions that have been raised. First of all, in my capacity as chairman of the Hall Support Group, just want to thank Barry for his very illuminating and concise presentation. I think the important thing from our perspective is the active engagement. And we are looking longer term to move on from just one kind of annual seminar to more regional meetings as well, so that we can get a greater involvement from management teams within halls to actually discuss common issues and look at ways of resolving some things and sharing good practice and things that work for us. Secondly, with regard to the issue of dining, most Masonic halls will of course be operating under their premises license by way of providing refreshments of liquid and food kind. And as chairman of St Helens Masonic Hall, we're no different to anywhere else. And certainly our board of directors have voted unanimously to provide social food should Masons wish to avail themselves of that after any Masonic meeting. But we're stressing, of course, that it cannot be connected in any way to a festive board or have any Masonic elements. But those principles also apply to the bar areas. And I think Masonic halls need to be wary of that. What we don't want to see is, because people can't have a festive board with Masonic toasts, etc., that people then think, well, actually, whilst we're in the bar all together, either before or after the meal, after the ceremony or meeting of any kind, we can do some impromptu toasts. We should be wary of giving guidance that that's not the case, that we keep any area other than where the meeting takes place, i.e. the temple, to be Masonic free in terms of elements of a festive board or toast of any kind.
Barry, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I would say that what Chris is doing at St Helens is consistent with the advice that I had provided to the three halls that I have spoken to. That as long as the one thing he didn't touch on, which unless he did, I missed it, but I'm pretty sure they are doing it because Chris and I have spoken, they must maintain this social distancing. So they would be typically 2 meters, and it'd be the 1 meter plus if they want the brethren to sit in the hall or sit in the dining room and eat. So,
I see that Ken Poynton's just asked when can we expect all of the results of the risk assessments to be completed by the hall management committees. Presumably that's more of the risk assessments being provided as a tool. They're not necessarily required to submit them back to the province, but it is recommended.
Yeah, we've asked for, I'm sorry, Andrew, we've asked to have them back for 2 reasons. Firstly, so that we know which halls have completed an assessment and are therefore COVID safe and able to open, because in the background, we, and probably me and my colleagues, we're eyeing up our diaries, and there's work that needs to be done on that. We want to know whether we're going to be able to visit here in September or October or November. And one way of knowing at least there's a starting point for that is that the hall has got a COVID safe environment. So we would like to know that back at the centre. And secondly, given that the halls have been so responsive about completing the financial risk analysis, they've been communicative from the receipt of the risk assessment, then it seems a sensible way that if they're going to put a copy of the completed assessment up within their own halls and perhaps provide them to the lodges and chapters, that's the advice they've been given, we may as well have a copy of that as well, so that we can see an emerging picture across the province of what's open COVID safe under the risk assessments that have been done, and that's helpful to us. So yes, we would like to have it back for those two reasons.
Is there going to be a feedback loop in that so that you can, so that we'll avoid halls necessarily treating them as a paper exercise in inverted commas, so that if you, if they put something in their risk assessment, is there going to be a feedback loop so you can see tangible evidence of them following their risk assessment?
We're not going to go back and audit it. It's up to the management of the halls. It's their responsibility. So if they say that we're providing a COVID safe environment and they haven't done the risk assessment, well, be that upon their own heads.
Okay. Andrew Thompson.
Hi, Andrew. Yeah, it was just to continue with what with the question that I'd asked, which it's in case we want to go forward with a proper meeting. I understand that we don't need much furniture in terms of that, but depends on the members whether or not they want to keep going or keep trying to see whether we can get the furniture out and at least the minimum. But if we didn't and we wanted to hold it in another province, is that allowed?
Yes, it is. What's actually required are two dispensations. One, I think you probably Ambleside, is it? One from the province of Cumberland and Westmoreland, and
Yep.
one from the provincial Grand Master of this province. The dispensation that we would issue basically says, yes, you can, provided that it's okay with the provincial Grand Master of the Cumberland and Westmoreland. And so that's how it works. But yes, you can, by all means, meet outside the province, providing that the provincial Grand Master of the province which you're meeting in gives permission for that. So yes, you absolutely can.
Right.
To answer the question.
That does. That absolutely answers the question. Thank you.
Kevin Poyden.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody. Barry, nice to see you. The reason for asking the question regarding the hall committees and hall chairman having when they're going to, how are they going to return the results to you, is because I am very, very concerned that if a hall has managed to make itself COVID safe, that should be communicated immediately down the line to the group chairman so he can pass on those details to his members to make sure that they have some more confidence in going back to the lodges.
I would agree entirely, and the note that I put out to the halls where I've responded to them, I've said that that once they have done I'm just looking at it, so I've given the advice on distancing to them and said, if you reach this happy state of affairs, i.e. the risk assessment done, then you need to discuss it with the group executive, and I feel sure that they will ask your local assistant provincial Grand Master as well, because putting the whole COVID safe, as you rightly point out, is one step, a big step, but then the group have got to get involved with the brethren, because that's really the next stage to get them back to business, as it were.
That's going to be one of our biggest problems. Without a doubt.
Can I also add in that actually for those lodges whose halls aren't opening or have stated that they're not going to be open until X date, it would be useful to have the information of the halls which are providing a COVID secure environment to meet, so that they can carry on the business of their lodges, even if they wouldn't ordinarily meet there. So there's another good reason there for making that information available if a hall is able and willing to open to receive other meetings as well. John Bicknell.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the treasurer at Chorley Masonic Hall, and we have a difference of opinion, I suppose is the safest way, as to what guidance from the government we at Masonic Halls fall under. There was a revised document came out on the 20th of July for multi-purpose community facilities, which, if you consider each lodge is a unit or a bubble of it in its own right, then different lodges meeting in the same premises I believe, fall under this multi-purpose communities facility. And in that, it states that where premises or locations which are COVID-19 secure can hold more than 30 people, they may do, subject to their own capacity limits. I just wonder what guidance Masonic halls should be adopting, given the criterion for multi-purpose facilities.
I've stuck with the guidance off the government's website, which is the up to 30 individuals, and that's what's also being said by Grand Lodge. So I've really not tried to develop it any further than that. And it is interesting, and the multi-purpose facilities would actually increase the opportunity to bring more people in. However, on the other side of that, certainly for dining, you could make a plausible argument for saying there shouldn't be more than 6 in 2 bubbles kind of thing. So, and I know this isn't an a la carte menu. You can pick the bits out of it you want and ignore the bits you don't want. So I've stuck with the government advice. So up to 30 people, you can host groups. Businesses following the guidelines can host groups of more than 30 people indoors. It's page 13 of the Keeping Customers and Visitors Safe advice from the Keeping Workers and Customers Safe during COVID-19 in restaurants, pubs, bars and takeaway services. So I've tended to look at it from that angle.
But if I may just come back with, there's still no clarity as to what guidance. Are we a private club? Are we a multi-purpose facility? Another issue I've got, if I may, is that a lodge meets 30 people on a Monday night, another lodge meets on Wednesday night, and on the Friday there's a chapter meeting where members from both of those lodges are attending. We've now got potentially the 30's gone up. You know, if you consider the infection rates, you all the time you do something like that where you get people from different lodges joining or going to another order meeting, you're expanding the potential infection, to my mind, exponentially. And I do have some concerns about that. I just wonder if anybody's any views about that.
Harry, do you want to talk about that?
Anybody who has a view?
Well, the creed occurs anybody who has a view.
Yeah.
You do have the potential to increase the risk because the more people meeting, then there must be a relationship with the number or the scope or probability that eventually someone's going to pick up this nasty illness. But within the risk assessment, you would need to look at what do you do when a meeting finishes. So you've really then got to go back and say, providing we allow people to meet using the government guidelines on social distancing, that should be fine. And as long as we then do what we've said we will do under our risk assessment when a meeting has taken place and before the next meeting does take place, then that should be fine. And at the end of the day, there's nothing, I don't think you could ever wrap a full ring of confidence, not confidence, but security around your hall to say you can come in here and absolutely we can guarantee nothing will happen to you. You couldn't do that if you went to Morrison's supermarket, for instance, either.
No, I understand. I do understand that, but if you've got 30 people, a craft lodge is somewhat different. If you're only in a craft lodge, you're going to meet the same people more or less every month or every couple of weeks. So you're outside the quarantine period. But when you're talking about chapters or other orders, you've got a much wider potential. Now, I know it's nothing to do with the hall. If the hall is adapting the COVID cleaning procedures every night or every day, indeed, that's fine. I'm thinking more about the potential for our members becoming,
I think
not more susceptible, but more likely.
I think that providing that the hall is adopting what they say in their risk assessment and accommodating the government guidelines, that constitutes a decision on the individual, or puts it back on the individual members to decide what level of exposure they're willing to go to. I'd also make a point that in many instances, what we're going to be looking at over the next couple of months are lodges that are going to be meeting with much smaller numbers deliberately, maybe just with the bare minimum quorum to enable them to get the business going. And there's obviously a significant difference between 6 people turning up to run a meeting which lasts 10 minutes where they don't need access to toilets or anything like that, to 30 people turning up for a much broader meeting as well. So I think that the size of the meetings needs to be considered. I do appreciate that if you go to more things, if you go out the house more, you expose yourself to more risk. I think that point is clear, but that's the same anywhere if you go to the supermarket twice in a week as much as if you go to a lodge and a chapter meeting in the same week. I think that those are equatable to each other. Chris Butterfield, do you want to come in?
Good afternoon, Barry. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, Chris.
You were talking about the risk assessment for halls and saying how you would like it being sent to province. I think the document itself is such an important document. It not only should go to province, but certainly where halls have got commercial operations, it needs to be put on websites, made available more generally to anybody that inquires to book it as well, because it's such an important document that gives that reassurance to anybody visiting the hall, not just Freemasons.
I would agree, and it's an interesting point you make that within the halls that I've spoken to, and it's a growing number and a good proportion of our total now, there are a number of halls who have commercial customers, and they're anxious to get those back sooner than they get the brethren back, in fact, because indeed they make a substantial contribution in the payments they make for the use of the hall, indeed often are subsidising the Freemasonry. So they have got to be able to be persuaded that it's safe to come back. And the halls that I have spoken to where that is the case, they're working really hard to get their commercial customers back in, now, providing the customers got an appetite for it. So yeah, there's nothing I would think I would endorse, that's the word I'm looking for, if a hall wanted to put the fact that it's put its risk assessment, it's done its risk assessment, COVID safe on its website, that would make a lot of sense.
Can I just ask, I don't know if you can answer this question, Barry, or not, but it's regarding the tracing of somebody who reported after, that they'd been at a meeting the night before, but the following day had developed COVID symptoms and then went on to test. Is there, I haven't looked at the risk assessment in detail, but are track and trace facilities mentioned in there to enable the halls or the secretary of the lodge or chapter to backtrack and inform people?
I think I've made the assumption that if it's a lodge meeting, they'll have the Tyler's book and they'll know who was there.
And so is it the responsibility of the secretary of the hall or who to kind of do that contacting? Incidentally, Terry McGill, I'll be coming to you next. I've seen you got your hand up. Sorry, I was just mentioning to Terry McGill that we're coming to him next.
I was just whizzing through the risk assessment because I think we've said that with the brethren, then they would have recorded it. They would have recorded those attending in the Tyler's book, so we would have the listing from there should we need to track and trace people.
Okay.
I was just looking a bit on visitors. So.
Mike Craddock, I can see you waving as well. I'll bring you in after Terry McGill.
No, it doesn't say so in the risk assessment.
Okay.
I'm happy to note this stuff down, and if need be.
I think just some guidance on tracking and tracing would be useful. Maybe that's something that we can look at.
Particularly now, if I can mention it, that the province is going to send I think, some PPE equipment to each thermometer. So,
there are some other bits and pieces with that as well, aren't there?
yeah.
Terry McGill.
Ah,
Good afternoon, everybody. What I was going to say was, downstream from now, there is going to be some significance to a number of halls about sanitizing soft furnishings. If you're going to sanitize soft furnishings, you need a fogger, and these things are anywhere between a couple of hundred and £3,000-4,000. They deposit a dry fog on all your furniture. That's the job done. But if somebody is going to come in for a practice, you're going to have to sanitize everything from the front door up into the lodge room or whatever, and back down again. From the point of view, from the selfish maybe point of view of Masonic halls, this is going to be a significant cost. And whilst there, I mean, to my mind, there doesn't seem to be any structure emerging as to how Masonic halls are going to survive while dining is going on. If they've got to sanitize, I mean, I know we're all different sizes, but we've got 20,000 square feet at Preston Masonic Hall, and we'd have to limit the rooms people were going in, but you've still got to sanitize a lot. This is quite a significant thing that I think will change attitudes of managements in Masonic halls over the next few weeks. I don't know what anybody else thinks.
Harry?
yeah, I'm not entirely convinced that you need a fogger to sanitize your soft furnishings or your soft chairs. That there must be proprietary products that you can use to sanitize them by wiping them over. Now, it may be a much bigger job in Preston than it would be in, say, Prescott Masonic Hall, just on scale. But I know that at Blackpool, they've already looked at this and considered what they would do to clean their soft furnishings or the chairs, the soft chairs, after use. So, and they're not using the fogger.
And of course, in some halls, it won't be an issue at all, because time also is on works as a good mitigation for this as well. If the room is left for 72 hours, it's the cleaning requirements are significantly reduced. Mike Craddock.
Afternoon all. Just a couple of questions or comments really. I've been involved in doing engineering risk assessments for some considerable time, and development of the six-pack, obviously, from an engineering point of view. But looking at what's happening, first of all, we're being given a model that looks great. It's going to be put on the web so we can look at it, or possibly it'll be sent out by province to each of the lodges. That's then got to be accepted by the halls, presumably, and that would be the whole management committee. And thirdly, it'll then have to be accepted by the lodge committees and signed on to by all three. It's not quite the same as going into a pub, but that's those first three parts of it. And the third part, I'm not sure whether once we've got a risk assessment, it's got to be communicated to the people who are entering and working within it. So they need to see what it says. From an engineering point of view, people used to have to see it and sign on to it, because the first thing HSE do when anything is array or somebody gets hurt is look at the risk assessment and ask the people, have they seen it and have they signed it? What's your comments on that, Barry? My comment there.
The see it, I entirely agree. We've asked for the risk assessment to be posted on the notice boards and for copies to be sent to the scribees and secretaries of lodges and chapters. we've not asked for people going in to actually sign off and say, yes, I've seen it, read it, understand it, I'm abiding by it. And certainly when I go into buildings, restaurants, our golf club and places like that, I might be tracked and traced, but I'm not signing to say, yes, I've read your risk assessment and I'm happy to continue. I don't have to sign anything like that.
Ken Robinson.
Good afternoon, brethren. Just out of interest, having recently done the risk assessment and as a result sending it to the insurance company, of which it will also be sent to the province, there are certain items that come out of it. A, you've got to have it COVID related. And quite rightly, as some people have said, after each meeting, you really should get the clean. If you have a meeting the following night, it has to be sanitized completely by a cleaner or somebody. And therefore, if you've got consecutive meetings, then it does become a cost, but it is, you can get out of it. But I think we need to go slowly to get it back into business, and by that maintaining the government and the province's guidelines about dining. If the lodge wants to have a meeting, then that is that lodge's privilege, and we would not stop them. However, if a lodge feels that it's not possible, or their members don't feel safe, whether we have done it, that we have done the COVID, which we have, then that is their prerogative as well. So we have to make sure that at the end of the day, that the safety of our members is the most important thing.
I would agree with that.
Oh,
and I would agree with what you suggested, or sorry, you were saying there, in respect of it would be unlikely and it would be an unrealistic expectation and an unfair one that everybody's all going to be back in business at Freemasonry on the 1st of September, because for some people it will take an awful lot longer than that, and that's their decision, and they should be allowed to, if you like, go at their own pace on that.
Yeah. Barry, there's some questions coming in regarding notifications and which regulatory or bodies that Masonic halls would have to notify before they open, whether that's the local authority, trading standards, or food standards.
I saw the David Hobbs one go past.
Yes.
There. That the Food Standards Authority would need to be informed on the catering side.
Are there any inspections required from the local authority before halls reopening, do you know? Or will that depend on the local authority?
That depends on the local authority, I would think. And a couple of the risk assessments that have been done in conjunction with the local authority, which seems a sensible arrangement. They've not used, all I have in mind hasn't used ours, but they've used their own, but they've also worked with the local authority to get it done. So that seems to me to be a good way of doing it. So ours is a guideline. You don't have to do it, but what we want to see is that one has been done that's consistent with ours. The phrase I used was, if you're not going to use ours, at least bounce what you're doing against ours, so we've got it covered. Yeah.
There's a few questions about PPE coming in, which I guess will be again covered in the risk assessments that have been issued, and again. That's something that the halls will be looking at when they do those risk assessments. Colin Preston has just put a note about face coverings mandated during lodge meetings. They are certainly recommended, and we feel that they should be worn in line with, well, if nothing else, of what the Grand Secretary said when he was here a couple of weeks ago, when he said that as a doctor, he feels that they should be worn at meetings, full stop. And that had nothing to do with the risk assessments or any of the other guidance that UGLE have put out. If somebody wants to wear a face mask, then absolutely they should be worn and should be welcomed in Masonic halls. And in fact, one of the things that the province are looking to provide for Masonic halls in their COVID secure starter kit, which we are going to be issuing, which includes the thermometer and various bits of PPE, are some face masks within that. So
UGLE advice is precisely that they should be worn.
Yeah, so that's one thing that we would absolutely encourage. I had an email regarding face visors as well, the plastic visors as well. I think that you do anything that really makes you feel comfortable and confident of being in the space, and if that's wearing a visor as well. Just whilst I see things scrolling past, somebody talked about the Tyler's book earlier. With just a reminder that we recommend that the secretary or scribee completes the Tyler's book as and when people arrive, rather than individual people sign it, just so that the secretary retains possession of that and is the only one coming into contact with it. I think it will be the first time that all the names in the Tyler's book are legible as well, so for any of the meetings. So I think that's certainly something that we will see. Question from Doug Fletcher, which is why are toasts not permitted? I think that's a really difficult question to answer, and the easiest way for me to answer is because UGLE have said that there's no festive boards, and festive boards include toast, and toasts are necessarily part of the festive board. So I think if you want any further details from that, I think it's a question for a higher authority. What I would say is what I've been saying to quite a few people on these calls, that actually what we're looking at now is 6 weeks away from the beginning of September. We know how quickly guidance has been changing over the past 6 weeks in itself. There's another announcement coming from the government on the 4th of August, and I suspect that there will be further advice there, and possibly with the developments in Spain, it might not be as quick as necessarily it would need to be. But I think, again, over the next 6 weeks, we will see some sort of relaxation in this. Again, it's not, it's conjecture, but it's just a feeling that I think we will be looking at back on some of the conversations that we're having now as being a little bit academic, and not the reality of the situation on the ground come September, or certainly October. And I don't think that's being too optimistic about it. There's all sorts of recommendations regarding various different products, cleaning products to use. And just Mark Holloway, I'm coming to you. I'm just unmuting you.
Hello, thanks, Barry and Andrew. Just to come back to Andrew's last comment, the reason that we aren't allowed toasts are because there's government guidance about not raising voices indoors, because it increases the likelihood of infection rates going up, because the person is expelling more moisture, which may contain COVID-19. It's something else that we need to consider when we're talking about social distancing with 2 people perhaps on a table, and separating that, and maybe you've got 20 people and there's then 10 tables. But if they're all from the same party, they'll be talking to each other and probably raising their voices, hence increasing the risk of COVID-19 spread. And halls need to really seriously take that into account. Thanks a lot.
It's one of the reasons why music isn't allowed in pubs, because it then encourages people to talk louder. So yes, Dennis Laird, you're unmuted if you want to come in. Dennis?
Put the kettle on.
He's just messaged me to say he wants
Could I just come back to a point that was raised earlier about signing that? Yes, I have read and understood the risk assessment. I felt my answer did tail off a little bit there, and I was desperately looking on my desk for the covering note that went out with the risk assessment, and it goes on and it says the completion of a risk assessment and its implementation abbreviating it, is a legal requirement under UK health and safety law. So you should have a full risk assessment for the premises already. So this one is to cover a risk that would not have been foreseen previously. So it's, if you like, supplemental to your existing risk assessment. And to comply with legislation law, this COVID-19 assessment template should be reviewed and completed with the specific hall in mind, with the control measures added to or deleted to suit the hall in question. And it finishes by saying when the COVID-19 risk assessment has been completed, it should be communicated to all members of the staff, hall management and franchisees, and a record kept securely. It's also recommended that a copy should be sent to every secretary, scribe or the equivalent in other orders in the building. And the Staying COVID-19 Secure 2020 poster, which was in the bundle that was sent, should be displayed in a prominent position and on the hall website, which picks up the point that Chris Butterfield quite sensibly made. And sometimes when these are tucked away in paragraph 6, last sentence, they may not get picked up, but nonetheless, there's probably a little bit more substance to support the answers, if you like, and my reasoning as for part of my answer to the questions that were raised on those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Dennis Laird. No, we can't hear you. We can't. I could see your lips moving, Dennis, but we can't hear you, and you are unmuted. So, not sure what's going on at your end there, unfortunately.
I did see a question slide.
Sorry, did you say? Carry on, Dennis.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, I don't know what happened
there.
There.
You go.
Right, okay. I've noticed a couple of things coming up on chat about insurance. Barrow Masonic Hall, no doubt like many others, insured via the now called Aston Lark, used to be Ingram, Hawkins and Knock. I contacted them last week and said that we were considering opening on a very restricted basis for Masonic uses only, our liability and insurance cover in any way. I've had a reply today and they've said that they can confirm that there are no additional requirements in place other than following government guidelines and social distancing rules. And it also goes on to say that if someone claims to have contracted COVID-19 after attending your premises and wishes to claim against the hall, the onus will be on them to 1, provide evidence that they've contracted COVID-19 from your premises, and 2, prove that the Masonic Hall was negligent. We're advising clients to follow government guidelines and social distancing rules. So it's obviously very, very important that we can make sure that we are fully COVID-19 secure.
Thanks, Dennis. That's valuable input.
Ian Lynch, I see you've got your hand up. You're unmuted now if you want to come in.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. Afternoon, brethren. I just want some clarification, really, from a discussion we had in a meeting last night. It's my view that if a risk assessment hasn't yet been properly carried out, and from that risk assessment, the recommendations haven't been put in place with regards to social distancing, labelling, cleaning, etc., that the hall should not be open. We do have one of our local users who's wanting to use the hall, saying that they will accept complete liability for their actions whilst using the hall. To me, reading through government guidance and the UGLE stuff, that's not acceptable. There's a duty of care on the hall management, as I see it, not on the user, and the hall should not be open for either Masonic nor commercial business until it's done its risk assessment and can say that it's COVID safe. Is that correct, or is there a different viewpoint, please?
Well, Ian, it's a good point, and I can only go back to the opening paragraph in the guidelines that were sent out. It's a legal requirement in UK health and safety law, so the risk of COVID-19 is a legal requirement. So this is a necessary adjunct to the existing risk assessment that is there, and the procedures that you put in place are an integral part of that. So I would think that you'd be on dangerous ground, acceptance of liability or not. People could easily say, yes, I accept that, but I'll tell you what, if there was an incident, they may not be as amenable to accepting the risk. So for a board of hall directors or the management of the hall, if they want to, there's nothing wrong with them wanting to get their paying customers in, their commercial customers, but really that ought to be under the conditions that they've carried out the risk assessment and can say, we've done it, and as a consequence, we're COVID safe. To do anything other than that, I would think is risky, verging on negligent.
Yeah. Just picking up Steve Williams's point about the number of meetings which take place at the hall and whether they should stick to 30 per night. It's obviously lodge meetings are restricted to 30 because that's what the government says. I would say that if there is sufficient time in between and things are clean in between, as you get in the pubs at the moment where there are different sittings, that you would be able to accommodate more than one meeting per day. I think that if you start looking into including practices in that as well, or simultaneously, depending on which hall you're at, may or may not be impractical. I think providing there is sufficient time and you have the cleaning regimes in your risk assessment, which will cover the different meetings, then there shouldn't be a problem with it. Again, it depends how many people are at those meetings and whether you have those procedures in your risk assessment and whether they are enacted in full. So I think that's something you need to look at. Once again, I'll go back to a point which I made in as much as some halls planning on opening, and there are really going to be two types of meetings which go ahead in the new season, or well, from now on, certainly in September and October. In as much as there will be some meetings where a lodge wants to meet as normally as possible, i.e. up to 30 people or whatever the present limit is at the time, or there will be some lodges and chapters which just want to meet with the bare minimum quorum. And I think that there needs to be a realistic dialogue between halls and lodges and chapters so they can establish which type of meeting it's going to be, so that they can undertake what facilities are going to be required and how they're going to be carried out, because it may well be that the procedures for both of those different types are slightly different. Of course, it may not be. They may be the same for both, but there's possibly an argument for making those different. I'm going to Roy. I'll come to Roy Henage. I'll come to you in a second. I'm just unmuting Rob Murphy from Urmston. Hopefully, yes, Rob, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Thanks, Andrew. The limitation on the maximum numbers, does that refer to a site or building? Because we have two separate buildings, and on occasions we are likely to exceed that maximum number of 30 by having meetings on in both buildings.
The lodge guidance from UGLE is 30. Now, I'll have to defer to Barry or a better knowledge in terms of for the actual venue. Barry.
Yeah, Rob, good afternoon. Your two venues are absolutely discrete. They're in separate parts of your property at Urmston. So you could have up to 30 people in what you would classify as your older building and up to 30 people in your new building. And I don't really see why. I don't see anything in the guidelines, government or otherwise, providing you keep the distancing rules in place in both buildings and the other conditions in place in both buildings, you ought to be able to have people simultaneously in both buildings. Do you service both from the same kitchen? No, you
Oh.
don't. You don't. Fine.
Bob Patterson.
Good afternoon, brethren. Question for Barry. I did put the question on there in relation to risk assessments. As the group secretary, when would we be likely to see that risk assessment or have sight of it? For my own personal reason, in my other role as the secretary in another group, it would serve a purpose because we meet at the Artists Club. Now, I know there's a number of lodges that meet there, but they're quite small. Our lodge is a reasonable size, probably in the next year outgrow the place. But having a discussion with the manager this morning, we reckon we could have a workable system that would allow us to bring a minimum that would fit into the small lodge room. I.e., we could go there, measure it out ourselves and suggest the minimum amount of furniture that we need to touch or manhandle. We can put the minimum amount of brethren there in order to hold a meeting to administrate it. And there'd be no bar facility. However, I did speak about having a temperature measurer, which they're willing to purchase. And I would provide them with a track and trace list, as we've already mentioned in the Tyler's book. But I always keep a list of those attending anyway for dining purposes. So I've always got them at the tip of my fingers. So my question would be, would we be able to get sight of that risk assessment? Because that would assist me and assist them using their risk assessment to facilitate the use of a non-Masonic hall that hold regular meetings. And would they be assisted in any way from the province in PPE and hand sanitizers for the brethren?
I'm more than happy to let you have the risk assessment, Bob, if you give me some contact details. Mine are in the yearbook, and if not, then you can contact me immediately after this, and I'll be happy to send them on to you.
Yep. Thank you.
And you're amongst at least 4 people now who are meeting at premises that are not run by the brethren, if you like, through a board of trustees or a board of directors. And they've asked pretty much the same question as you. And clearly what you'd be looking for is that whoever runs and owns the premises to have conducted a risk assessment. I'm happy to let you have ours, and you can bounce, to use that phrase again, ours against that. And I've made a note to myself that when I next speak to Peter Taylor, who's organising the PPE equipment, whether we would consider letting that go to those meeting places that are not specifically, if you like, under the brethren, under ourselves. I know there are 37 that we've contacted. There's probably about another dozen or so. Rather like Hawkshead, the Grange down in Stockport, the Artists Club, and there must be others where they're not under our management, but we should consider, or whether we would consider, providing the temperature thermometer to them. And I probably ought to, as a follow-up now, get contacts for all of the ones out beyond the 37, let you have the risk assessment and give you what the conclusion is on the PPE equipment.
Roy Henage.
Can I ask a question about sometimes some nights that the chapter meet, we follow a lodge into the lodge room, and responsibility will it be to make sure that lodge room is clear before chapter takes over?
I think that's going to have to be a negotiation between you and the hall. It may well be the case that you're not going to be able to do that in the immediate future, or there is going to have to be more time between the 2 meetings to allow for proper cleaning and various things like that. So I think that is going to have to be done you're going to have to negotiate that with the hall and see what cleaning regimes they have in place for that. It's going to be something which it sounds from right now that is not going to be practical or possible for the foreseeable future. But again, like I say, it's a negotiation between you and the hall. I'm keen to just draw the hall section to a close, because I'm sensing that there'll be some other questions about various other things. I've seen a question from Ian Dawson on there, which is regarding holding committee meetings by Zoom. Ian, you've put when the season starts, you don't need to wait for the season to start. You can hold a committee meeting by Zoom now. And if it, moving forward, if it's something that the Brethren of the Lodge are happy to continue, I don't really see a reason why it can't continue to be held by Zoom. Moving forward, it's if it turns out to be more practical and more favoured by the Brethren, and you ensure that everybody has access to it if they wish to have access to it, I don't see a problem with that moving forward. So, Bob, no, the province does have a Zoom account, but unfortunately I can't share the login with all 485 secretaries and scribes. So unfortunately, the £15 a month will have to be borne by either yourself or the lodge or chapter. So apologies for that. So thank you for that. Barry, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it worthwhile. Maybe that's going a bit far, but I hope you found it worthwhile at least. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your input. I'm sure that if anybody has any questions or queries, they can come to you direct via your details in the yearbook. Failing that, I'm sure that if there's more updated information, you'll be bringing that to the attention of the halls as they go along. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon and being here.
And thank you and the Brethren, because it is healthy to have your views challenged, and there's no harm in that. It's a process I enjoy. I don't get the least bit irritated by it. And I was only going to make one final point, and that is within the bundle that was sent out, it talks about the Staying COVID Secure poster. It has 5 points on it, and halls would do well to go back and reflect on that. And the first one is that we've carried out a COVID-19 risk assessment and shared the results with the people who work here. The second one is we have cleaning, hand washing and hygiene procedures in line with the guidance. Third one is we've taken all reasonable steps to help people work from home, that is if that's appropriate, and we're not really seeing that particularly from the Brethren's perspective. We've taken reasonable steps to maintain a 2-metre distance in the workplace. And interestingly, the final one, which was in the risk assessment that has come from the Health and Safety Executive, is where people cannot be 2 metres apart. We have done everything practical to manage transmission link. And of course, the government advice shifted a little on that when they opened the pubs to the 1 metre plus. So Brethren, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. And if you feel there are things that you really do need to bring my attention to, or there's things you need advice and help on, then I or one of my colleagues on the Hall Support Group would only be too happy to hear from you.
Just before you go, Barry, Phil Gunning.
I wasn't about to leave. I'll stay on.
You want to say something?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I just want to clarify something regarding Brethren who are meeting at a non-Masonic hall. In the letter that was sent out last week by the Provincial Grand Master, he indicated that those who are not meeting in recognised Masonic halls will be contacted separately to arrange for PPE for the thermometer and so forth. So that's to allay any fears that those who are meeting not in a Masonic hall will be left on their own.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Phil. And thank you very much, Barry. And I hope to see you soon in person.
Indeed.
It's going to be nice to see the bottom half of people as well as the top.
Not today, though.
Once we get back to it. So thank you very much, Brethren. I'm going to just hang around here if people have any other questions that they want to ask me. But other than that, I hope you have a good weekend, and I shall see you next week.